We've heard in this committee and in other committees, hearing from Chief Tidwell, the comment that what we really have to get our arms around is the fire borrowing issue, so that we change the way that we budget for fire. I absolutely concur, but I also recognize that there are other issues out there that are at play. So we just can't, if we were to fix the fire borrowing today, it still leaves us with some of the policies that are locking us in. And that's what I want to talk to you about this morning. First, Mr. Bonney, when we talk about the Tongass transition, going from old growth to young growth, that's always been part of the plan for the Tongass there, but the disagreement has really been on the time frame. The Secretary's memorandum from 2013 calls for a transition to take place between 10 and 15 years. Most within the industry, certainly all within the industry in Alaska, say it's going to take much longer than that. But regardless of arguing over the time period, what you have in play with this transition is you're still subject, management is still subject to the existing laws, the existing regs that are generally applicable with respect to our timber harvest. The Secretary's memorandum, so far as I know, doesn't propose making any changes that currently apply. There's no departure from the National Forest Management Plan that requires that the timber be harvested on sustained yield. There's no modification from the existing Tongass land management plans, the beach setback rule, no departure from the stream buffer rules that are set out in the Tongass Timber Reform Act. So how do we do this? Unless there is some willingness to perhaps look to departing from some of these statutes or regulations, how do we get to what you are discussing, Mr. Bonney, which is this transition to second growth? Because my assessment, and that of many who have been studying this for a long time, is that you cannot get to where you are seeking to with the volume of second growth, given these statutory and regulatory requirements.
So, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think, we've got some flexibility in the Sea-Alaska legislation for culmination of mean annual increment that will allow us to get into stands earlier. We're obviously looking right now at a plan amendment on the Tongass Land Management Plan, working closely with the Tongass Advisory Committee there. We hope there will be good recommendations that come out of there that look at the land base where we can get to second growth timber. So I think we're confident that both looking at the land management plan, working through looking at lower rotation ages so we can get into younger timber earlier will be important elements. In addition to that, we want to look at ways that we can provide assistance to the local industry. So are there grants programs or other things? We've already had an initial conversation, I think, with your staff and need to follow up about ways that we can provide assistance there for the transition. I think the, old growth timber continues to be controversial there. The promise of a transition is both to hold on to the industry and to get to a place where not only we can provide a sustainable timber base, but perhaps we can actually put more on the market because those sales will be easier to move.
Well, you're using the same buzzwords that we've heard from the chief about flexibility and about assistance, but you've also heard my criticism that we haven't seen that assistance. We haven't seen the retooling that has been promised. The flexibility has been in word only. You mentioned the CMAI waiver, very, very familiar with that, of course, because we worked with Forest Service on that in the Sea-Alaska legislation. But what we've got with the Tongass, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but we harvested there in the early 60s, and the harvest was along the beach and along the streams. And harvest of the oldest of the young growth timber can't be permitted because of the restrictions under the Tongass Timber Reform Act and the amended restrictions. So the oldest of the young growth is not going to be available for harvest, notwithstanding the departure from CMEI. So my time is over on this, but I want to come back and have a further discussion on that, because I think sometimes it's real easy to throw some terminology around, make it sound like help is on the way. But for people like Mr. Brown, for people like Kirk Dahlstrom, and his testimony is really quite compelling when he says, look, I've got no other available sources of timber supply. And we need to make sure that it's more than just words that give assurance that there's flexibility and that there's some workability. Because right now, I don't have it, and I don't think that the operators on the ground have it. I'll go to our ranking member. Let me pick up where I left off. You had mentioned the CMAI waiver and what flexibility that might provide to you. And I noted that given the rotation age in the Tongass of 92 to 100 years, and given where the harvest has been historically since the early 60s along the beaches and along the streams, that we're not there, even with the waiver of CMAI, because the oldest of the young growth just isn't ready. So given that, just from a practical perspective, how does this departure from CMAI actually increase the volume of economic second growth timber that's available for harvest out of the Tongass?
So we've got a timber sale right now, Dargon Point, that you may be familiar with. It's a 70-year-old stand that there's been a lot of interest in. We put it out for bid, and there were a lot of folks that came forward. All of that to say, not that every stand is a Dargon Point, but that there is interest if we can put good young growth stands up that they will be younger than 90 years old or 100. One of the things we've asked the Tongass Advisory Committee to do is really to delve into the numbers here, to look at the available second growth, where it is, how fast it comes on board, and the types of things that we can look at to potentially expand the land base where we can get second growth. I think that analysis of the Tongass Advisory Committee is important, and I think that's going to be a critical part of our work we do around the Tongass Land Management Plan amendment as well.
Let me ask you, Mr. Brown, in your view, what would the timber industry in Southeast need to make a successful transition to harvest to second growth, and how long is it going to take?
Yeah, I would, to answer that question, I think I would focus less on the volume. I don't really agree with the CMAI making more volume available, but a bigger thing for me is we only have one sawmill left of any size, and it's an old growth mill. So basically what you're talking about when you transition to second growth is you have to retool. Right. And that's going to take significant investment. And in my opinion, nobody is going to make any significant investment of the size we're talking about and rely on the U.S. Forest Service to supply that timber based on their track record.
Well, and I've had exactly those conversations with Kirk Dahlstrom about the investment that it would take, that you simply cannot utilize what he has in place there at Viking with a younger, that second growth timber. It does take retooling. The investment is considerable. So there is this trade-off here between well, it's a financial trade-off, absolutely. And the question is whether or not you can rely on them. You mentioned that you would be speaking to Mr. Dahlstrom's testimony, and as I read through it, it's a pretty sad story. The owner of the only remaining mid-sized sawmill operating in the state has no other reliable sources of timber supply. He's supporting over 150 jobs within the state, but our mill in Alaska is almost out of logs now. We currently have only about 2 months' supply in the log yard. And then in the pleading that was filed in the U.S. District Court, he speaks to the issue of litigation and delay, and says even though the lawsuit was found to be without merit in 4 legal opinions. The litigation delayed operations on this sale, consumed Viking's financial resources, and made planning mill operations and the general conduct of business very difficult. That was as it related to the diesel sale. But it just speaks to what we see time and time again, where it seems to be that delay caused by litigation just kind of goes on and on and on. And the very lifeblood of these smaller operators is just being sucked dry. Let me ask very quickly to you, Mr. Brown. So many have come to the conclusion that the existing management structure just doesn't work. The only solution is to remove some of the existing timberlands from federal control. There have been a lot of different variations on this idea, but the Alaska Forest Association has a state forest concept. The governor's timber task force has recommendations, but you are looking to that alternative management model within the state of an Alaska state forest. Can you speak very quickly to the benefits of that, the merits of that, rather than hoping and praying you're going to get a source from the federal side?
Right. Well, real quickly, I would point to the state of Washington, which has, I think, about 2.5 million acres under state control, and it's got to be the most successful state timber sale program in the whole nation. And when the Timber Task Force, who was a part of an AFA, looked at that, that was kind of the model we looked at, was the way the DNR in Washington manages their forest. And it provides certainty for operations. All the timber is competitively bid, but it's a very good program, and I would encourage anybody to look at that program as a model. There's good protection for fish and wildlife and everything, that you would hope for, but it also provides sustainable timber for the timber operators in that state.
Appreciate that. Mr. Bonney, is the administration willing to work with us on some alternative management models?
Well, I think we work with a number of governors in a number of states. Obviously, happy to follow up and have conversations. Chris Maish has been a great partner of ours up there, and happy to have conversations.
Look forward to having that. Senator Cantwell.